Chuck Norris said, "Show me what you've got." 12 seconds later, Bruce Lee's fist was 1 inch from his face. Chuck didn't move. Didn't speak. Just stood there thinking for a long moment. Then he said something that changed both their lives. "Show me more." Long Beach, California. August 1968. The International Karate Championships. The arena was full, fighters and masters from karate, kung fu, taekwondo, judo, representing systems that had been refined across decades and in some cases across centuries. Each one present to demonstrate that what they had built was real. Chuck Norris was 28 years old and had not lost a competition in over a year. He was not there to compete. He was there to demonstrate Tang Soo Do, the Korean system he had studied since his military service, practiced with the daily discipline of someone who understood that mastery was not a destination but a practice. His board breaking was controlled. His forms were executed with the clean precision of someone who had drilled them past the level of thought. The audience saw order, discipline, and the specific quality of confidence that came from having tested capability against serious resistance and been confirmed. Earlier that same day, another martial artist had taken the stage. Bruce Lee was 27. Not yet a global name, Enter the Dragon was 5 years away. But his performance produced a different reaction than the demonstrations that preceded it. The 1-inch punch, the 2-finger push-ups, the speed drills that required the camera crew to adjust their equipment because 24 frames per second was insufficient to make the techniques visible. People weren't just impressed. They were surprised by the specific quality of what they were seeing, not the performance of martial arts but the distillation of it. Everything unnecessary had been removed. What remained was direct, efficient, and unsettling in the way that the simplest things were sometimes the most unsettling. Bruce watched Chuck's demonstration from the side. He watched with the focused attention he brought to everything, not casually, analytically. Identifying the principles underneath the techniques, reading the system through its expression. What he saw was genuine. Chuck Norris had built something real. They met backstage. Two men who were both there to demonstrate and had both watched each other demonstrate. The specific quality of the introduction between serious practitioners who had just watched each other work and who had formed assessments that each knew the other had also formed. Chuck acknowledged Bruce's speed first. Said it directly, he hadn't seen movement like that before, the economy of it, the way techniques arrived before there appeared to be enough time for them to travel. Bruce responded by noting Chuck's structure. The quality of his forms, the integrity of the biomechanical chain in each technique, the visible product of years of repetition done correctly. This was genuine exchange between people who respected what they were looking at. The conversation moved deeper. Chuck stood by traditional methods, forms, repetition, lineage, the accumulated wisdom of a system transmitted through structured practice. The foundation that made technique reliable under pressure. Bruce questioned it. Not dismissively, precisely. His argument was that forms built patterns, and patterns were readable. That a system optimized for a specific context was a system that would encounter contexts it hadn't been optimized for. Chuck pushed back. The forms weren't just patterns, they built the physical architecture that made everything else possible. The muscle memory, the structural integrity, the automatic responses that pressure would activate. Bruce agreed, partially. Forms were useful. They were not complete. Real situations were unpredictable in ways that any single system's vocabulary couldn't fully address. The conversation was the conversation of two serious practitioners who had each built something real and who were now standing close enough to each other's work to see its edges. Then Chuck said it. "Show me what you've got." The tone was what made the moment, not a challenge in the aggressive sense, more like a direct question. A man who had spent years asking questions about his own practice and who had just watched someone do something he couldn't fully categorize, asking to understand it more directly. Bruce paused for a fraction of a second. Then he agreed. A space was cleared backstage. Not large, the specific improvised arena of a corridor and a cleared section of floor, witnessed by whoever happened to be nearby and drawn closer by the quality of attention the two men were bringing to each other. Within minutes, several martial artists were watching. They faced each other. Chuck in his structured Tang Soo Do stance, balanced, grounded, weight distributed for both offense and defense, the posture of someone who had stood in this configuration so many times it had become architectural. Bruce relaxed. Almost without form. Hands at a height and angle that didn't match any classical guard, weight balanced in the way that a body balanced when it had stopped performing readiness and simply was ready. They began. Chuck moved first. A quick jab, not a committed attack, a measurement. Testing range, looking for the defensive response that would reveal how Bruce organized his protection. Bruce shifted slightly. The jab passed him by a margin small enough to be unsettling. Not the large evasion of someone buying time, but the minimal displacement of someone who had known where the jab was going before it left Chuck's shoulder. Chuck followed with a reverse punch. Same result. No contact. Bruce adjusted distance with a movement so economical it appeared lazy until you measured the outcome. Chuck increased his pace. He went to combinations, jab, punch, kick, the sequences that had worked in competition, that he had built across years of practice, that his body produced with the automatic precision of patterns drilled past the level of conscious choice. Bruce responded differently than any competitive opponent Chuck had faced. He didn't block. He didn't counter with standard responses. He adjusted, redirected, avoided with movements that were individually small and collectively impenetrable. No wasted energy anywhere in his body. No preparation visible before responses arrived. The space between them was conducting information in a way that Chuck was processing but hadn't yet organized into language. Chuck attacked with full intent. A committed combination, the real version of what he had been doing, the strikes that carried his actual capability rather than the measured testing of the previous exchanges. Bruce intercepted mid-action. Not blocked, the specific word was wrong. The kick was redirected by a contact so light that the force didn't accumulate against it but moved around it, continuing past its intended destination while Bruce was no longer at that destination. A spinning technique was neutralized before it could develop its power. Before the rotation had built enough momentum to be effective, a small intervention at the correct moment had made the momentum irrelevant. Then Bruce stopped his strike 1 inch from Chuck's face. The fist was there, present, visible, 1 inch from the bridge of Chuck's nose. Holding. Not trembling, not slowly approaching, simply present at 1 inch with the complete precision of someone who had decided exactly where the technique would stop and had stopped it there. He held it for 2 seconds. Then he withdrew. The backstage space was quiet. Not the silence of a crowd that had witnessed a conclusion, the silence of people who had watched something that required processing before response was appropriate. Chuck stood where he had been standing when the fist arrived 1 inch from his face. He was thinking. His techniques had not failed in the conventional sense. He had not done anything incorrectly. His jab was sound. His combinations were sound. The spinning technique was the technique he had thrown correctly 1,000 times. None of them had worked. Not because of a defensive response he could categorize and address. Because the person he was throwing them at had been somewhere other than where they were aimed, using movements so small and so precisely timed that the conventional vocabulary of attack and defense didn't quite describe what had occurred. Bruce spoke. His voice was even, without performance. "Your techniques are real," he said. "Your structure is sound. What I'm pointing at is the context. Tournament fighting operates within a rule system that shapes how you move. The rule system creates predictable patterns, both in how you attack and in how you expect opponents to respond. Those patterns are readable to someone who isn't inside the same rule system." Chuck considered this. The argument was not an insult. It was an observation about the relationship between a system and the context that system had been optimized for. Every system was optimized for something. Every optimization was also a limitation. He had known this abstractly. He was feeling it concretely for the first time. This was the moment when ego typically stepped in, the defensive reorganization that protected a self-concept threatened by new information. The justification, the counter-argument, the retreat toward the accomplishment already achieved. Chuck did something different. He said, "Show me more." 2 words. The most difficult 2 words available to a champion. What followed was not a lesson in the formal sense. It was an exchange, 2 practitioners with different systems working in the same space, each exposing their approach to the other's critical attention. Bruce demonstrated the interception principle, the specific timing of JKD's foundational insight, that moving before an attack committed was more efficient than responding after it had. He showed Chuck the precursor signals in his own striking, the hip loading that preceded the kick, the shoulder drop that announced the punch, the preparatory tensions that were visible a fraction of a second before the technique they introduced. Chuck saw his own movements described from the outside. The specific experience of having something you do automatically made visible to you by someone who watched it with different eyes. He adjusted. Tried to remove the tells. Bruce watched the adjustments and identified the new tells created by the attempt to suppress the old ones. Chuck laughed, the genuine laugh of someone encountering a problem that kept expanding the more precisely you examined it. Bruce showed him Wing Chun's centerline principle. The specific structural logic of maintaining the shortest path to the opponent's center and denying that path to the opponent's strikes. Chuck understood it immediately and began applying it to Tang Soo Do's structure, finding the places where the principle fit and the places where his system had answered the same problem differently. They worked for 3 hours. The backstage of the International Karate Championships, not the setting either of them would have chosen for the exchange, but the setting in which it occurred. The arena noise from the ongoing competition drifting through the walls. People moving past the space they had claimed, glancing in, occasionally stopping to watch for a few minutes before moving on. What they were doing was the specific thing that serious practitioners did when they found other serious practitioners, comparing notes on problems that each had been working on independently, finding the places where different paths had arrived at the same solution and the places where different paths had arrived at different solutions that could both be true simultaneously. At the end, Chuck said, "Why haven't we talked before?" Bruce said, "We're talking now." They trained together regularly after Long Beach. Not as student and teacher, both directions were wrong. As collaborators. Two people who had each built something real and who were willing to test what they had built against each other's understanding. Chuck brought structure. The specific quality of Tang Soo Doo's foundational work, the physical architecture that decades of form practice had built in his body. The structural integrity that made his techniques reliable under pressure. Bruce brought adaptability. The capacity to operate without a fixed form, to respond to what was actually present rather than to what a system's pattern expected. Both improved. Chuck's movement became more fluid. The forms remained, the foundational value of the forms was real and both men understood this, but his relationship to them changed. The form became the foundation for movement that could depart from the form when the situation required it. Bruce refined his structural power. The specific thing that Chuck's work had that JKD's foundational principles sometimes underemphasized, the importance of body mechanics that generated force independent of speed, the structural chain that made mass relevant even in a system built around minimal mass. They disagreed regularly. The disagreements were the productive kind, two people who respected each other enough to push back, who had built their frameworks from real experience and who tested each framework against the other's critical attention. In 1972, Bruce invited Chuck to appear in Way of the Dragon. The fight in the Colosseum in Rome, choreographed, filmed, edited, produced for a cinema audience, but containing something that the choreography didn't create and couldn't fake. Two people who had actually worked together, who understood each other's movement from 3 years of collaborative training, expressing that understanding in a medium that reached millions of people who would never see the backstage corridor in Long Beach where it had started. Bruce Lee died on July 20, 1973. Chuck heard the news and felt the specific quality of loss that came from someone who had changed not just what you knew but how you thought about knowing. At the funeral, he spoke. He did not speak about Bruce's speed or his films or his cultural significance. He spoke about the conversation, the specific ongoing conversation that had started with "Show me what you've got" and had continued for 5 years. He said Bruce had shown him that the question was more important than the answer. That a system confident in its own completeness had stopped asking whether it was complete. He said the moment in Long Beach, the fist stopping 1 inch from his face, had not been a demonstration of superiority. It had been a question, delivered in the language of physical contact. The question was, what else is possible? Chuck's answer had been "Show me more." He said he would spend the rest of his career finding out. Two martial artists at the International Karate Championships in 1968. 12 seconds of honest exchange. One fist stopping 1 inch from one face. Two words spoken in response. "Show me more." The two words that changed everything, not because they acknowledged defeat but because they refused to mistake the edge of a system for the edge of what was possible. In the martial arts world, standing at the edge of your system and asking what was beyond it required more than skill. It required the specific courage of someone willing to find out they were incomplete. Chuck Norris had that courage. That was the part Bruce Lee respected. That was the part that lasted.